Hi everyone, Happy New Year. I cannot believe it's 2025 already, but New Year's greetings from me and my three lovely cats, Little Legs, Wendy, and Khaleesi. As you know, the Sci-Fi Feminist podcast has been on a break for quite a while, but recently I've had the pleasure of speaking to some female authors writing horror, science fiction, and fantasy. And towards the end of last year, or I can't remember if it was the beginning of this year, I had the pleasure of talking with Deborah Tomkins, who is an author from the UK and who wrote this lovely novella called Aerth. So, in this interview, we talked a bit about her novel. We talked about her passions in terms of climate change and global warming and how she addresses these issues in the novel. So, please enjoy this interview between me and Deborah. And if you would like to learn more about the book, you can head over to my blog. You can see there where you can purchase it. And you can also read the interview there if you would like to read it. So I will try to do more of this year. It's one of my New Year's resolutions. But until then, for now, please enjoy this interview between me and Deborah. And thank you, as always, for supporting the Sci-Fi Feminist podcast and blog. Have fun and enjoy the interview. Okay, so can you introduce yourself to the readers and a bit of your history and who you are
Mhm.
and how you got into writing and, just all about yourself?
Okay. Well, excuse me. My name is Deborah Tomkins. Excuse me. I live in Bristol in the southwest of England, which I've just been extolling. It's a beautiful city, very historic. Profited actually from the slave trade, which it's coming to terms with now. Excuse me. I have a frog in my throat. And I have three adult children, and I'm married and have two dogs, and we all like Bristol very much. I always loved stories as a child. I read all the time. My parents are both great readers. All my sisters, I have three sisters, and they're all great readers. And we were always surrounded by books. And growing up, at the time we didn't have many TV channels, and there was no daytime TV, and the children's programming was very restricted to after school for about 2 hours or an hour and a half or something. So we were thrown on to our own resources. We did lots of make believe and dressing up and all that kind of thing, and reading, a lot of reading. And I always thought one day I would like to write my own stories. And I think I did actually, at school and as a primary school child, I did. And then you get to secondary school and it all becomes a lot more serious. Everything academically becomes a lot more serious. And I carried on reading, but I didn't write anything really. And then getting into writing what I do now, I mean, I've done a lot of things in my life. I was a dictionary writer for a number of years for ESL. A big
That's
project.
very interesting.
It was
Okay.
really interesting. I did a French and linguistics degree, so I'm
Okay.
very interested in language and how it's used. I
Mm.
can't say I speak many languages. I'm fluent in French, but I'm not. I don't. I have a smattering of a few others, mostly European languages. And I'm going to attempt to learn Swahili in the next few months.
Oh,
So
cool. Okay.
that's an ambition, which I don't hold me to it because I may not make it, but I'm going to try. Um, and so I did linguistics. I went into ESL dictionary writing for HarperCollins, as Collins as it was then, William Collins and Sons, and they had a big project called Co-Build, which was based at the University of Birmingham in the UK, and the Co-Build acronym stood for Collins, Birmingham University International Language Database.
I did not know that.
No, you wouldn't,
Wow.
because I joined it almost at the very beginning. I think it was just a few months in. So
Okay.
we had a lot of academic input, but we also had you know, we were the first dictionary project in the world to use a corpus of languages actually used in the present day, or this is back in the 1980s, which was far more useful for foreign learners of English than going through all the historical origins of words and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it was really, I mean, I used my linguistics skills and my interest in language a lot back then. Anyway, we had children and life moved on. And over that time, probably by the early 90s, by about 1990 or so, I was getting very, very concerned about climate. And I was reading stuff that wasn't really very obvious in the media, in the newspapers. Of course, there was no internet back then. And getting very concerned about climate, but more so about biodiversity and about the particularly in the UK, where the UK is one of the worst countries in the world for native wildlife. Just we're down in the bottom 5%.
Wow,
Other countries do much better. So I think our overuse of pesticides has been a big contributor, and herbicides, which means that birds don't have anything to eat, and then bird populations plummet and other things. So I was getting very concerned and very interested, and anyway, life moved on again, and I actually, in the mid-90s, I joined an organisation. It's a charity which has a membership model called Green Christian, and it's Christian and it's green. It was called Christian Ecology Link back in the day, but not political in any way, because charities are not allowed to be. But we worked really hard, and I became a trustee eventually, and then co-chair for 5 years. So I'm very pleased to belong to that organisation. I think it does a lot of really good work, but we're a very small charity. But we do a lot of really good work. So all those coming together, and then I realised in the 2000s, I was doing a lot of reading, going to bookshops and going to libraries, doing a lot of reading about climate and peak oil, which is a big thing back in the day, and about what we're doing to the planet. And I was getting increasingly concerned. And then I read, in 2006, I think it was, I read an article by somebody in the New Scientist magazine. Oh no, it wasn't. It was a book that he wrote. Sorry, it was a book, and it was taken for. He's a science journalist, and his name escapes me, but it'll probably come back to me in a minute. Fred, somebody or other, and he said the thing that's keeping scientists awake at night is climate and what's happening. And I already knew quite a bit about it, but then I thought, well, like lots of people, it's not being talked about in Parliament. It's not being talked about much on the BBC. It's not being talked about in newspapers. It can't be as bad as I thought. It can't be as bad as I thought. And then I read this article where he said that this is the thing that really, really gave scientists sleepless nights. And I thought, oh, I've got to take this really seriously now. So I started reading more. And then I thought, where are the novels? Where are the books? Where are the short stories about all this? There aren't any. So I dived straight in and wrote this, not having had any kind of creative writing experience since I was a primary school child, really. I dived straight in and wrote a very long novel about 3 generations of a family navigating the challenges of a very rapidly warming world in the 21st century in the UK. And it's not been published. It was very long. It was about 135,000 words. And I didn't know what I was doing, but that's when I learned to write. Basically, I found my voice. I didn't know any other writers at all. But what was rather wonderful is that at the time, in the town we were living in, there was an independent bookshop. And I went to the bookshop owners, 2 men, and one of them very kindly said, well, I'll read your book for you, which was amazing, because I didn't know anybody who would read my book, apart from my dear husband, who did. He waded through it. And that was immensely encouraging, because he said, keep going. You need to keep. He said some very encouraging things. Now looking back at that work, I know how young in the craft I was, and how inexperienced, and I could see lots of things I could do so much better. But he was really, really encouraging, so it kept me going. Then, so I wrote that between 2007 and 2010, and then we moved in 2010 to Bristol, when my husband had a new job, and I still had this book. I sent this book out to about 3 people, and they didn't want it, not surprisingly. And at that point, I thought, oh, blow, I put my heart and soul into this. And then I got the idea for another story, which is actually now going to be published in May, called The Wilder Path. And so in about 2013, I went to my first ever writer's course, which was a few weeks at a local community centre, where the teacher talked about structure and the things I just had never heard about, really. I heard about writing magazines that I could subscribe to. I met some friends who I still meet today. Every few months we have lunch together. And that really encouraged me, because I thought, there's a community of writers here. And I've slowly got into the community of writers in Bristol. I don't meet up with many of them, but I know they're there, and I do meet up occasionally with a few. And so I then wrote The Wilder Path. And then after that, by that stage, I was very interested in all types of writing, creative writing. So in 2017, I went to the first ever Flash Fiction Festival, which was held in Bath that year. And ever since then, it's been held in Bristol. If it had been held in Edinburgh or London, I probably wouldn't have gone. But because it was local, I could do it. It was quite easy to fit around the family and the dogs and everything else. And I learned about flash fiction, which is why I ended up writing Aerth, as it now is. It was first called First Do No Harm. And that was longlisted in the Bath Novella in Flash Award about 2 years before the pandemic. And then since then I've added to it and taken bits away, and then I sent it off to various people who admired the writing. They always say that, but please send us something else. And I really thought it was unpublishable. And then it was a kind of Neil Griffiths knows this of Weatherglass. He's my publisher and editor. And I said, really, I thought this was my last ditch attempt. I sent it off to Weatherglass, and they liked it. And then Annie Smith liked it, and then the rest is history. So that was about just over a year ago. I heard that it was on the shortlist, which is really exciting. No, about just under a year ago. So wow. It's been and it's been probably like many writers. It's not been intentional in the sense that I didn't set out to be a writer when I was 25 or something. I just always had this kind of, could I do it, in the back of my head. And then I saw this massive gap in the market, which is now being filled, actually, thankfully, with climate fiction, which covers all sorts of genre. It's not a genre of its own, I don't believe. I think it's a class. It's talking about all sorts of things, but it could be science fiction, or it could be realist fiction, or it could be any number of things. So so that's a kind of quite a long way around of saying I fell into it.
I think
by accident.
That's really inspiring, because like you said, I think any creative arts, we don't set out to do it. It just kind of happens. When I wanted to study fine arts, my dad told me, okay, you can do it, but after 4 years, I'm not paying for anything, and you have to be able to get a job in fine arts. So it was kind of like a threat, like, I'll pay for this, but it's your problem if you can't get a job. But I think it's inspiring that, like, over so many years you actually got into writing, and now you published a book, which is like really great.
It's really exciting, yeah.
I wanted to ask, so when you decided that, or when you realized that climate change is such an issue, was there like a certain event that made you realize that? Or because I don't think we don't like wake up one morning and we're like, oh, climate change. Or what made you so passionate and concerned about that topic?
I actually don't know, except that I was brought up in the countryside, And I do love nature very much, and I always did as a child. And I could sit for quite a long time just staring at, leaves or birds or trees or something. So I had that privilege, which not everybody has. And my parents were Londoners, actually, so they didn't really have a lot of experience of the countryside at all,
Yeah.
which was interesting. But we had a nice big garden where we were living at the time, and we were in a village, and there was all this nature around me, which actually there's not so much nature around children in the countryside any longer. But I could hear in the mornings, I was woken by birds. It's actually in that kind of memory of being woken by bird songs so loud you could not sleep through it. That's actually, I put that into the novella. Just unbelievable, the sound of it. And I remember being quite frightened when I was a very small child and saying, "Mummy, what's that noise?" Crying, calling for her. And she said, "It's all right. It's only the birds waking up. It's all right." And then I was fine. But I was a very small child. I was maybe 3 or 4. So we were surrounded by nature, and I absolutely loved it. So that was the beginning of it. And then beginning to hear these hints in the papers that things were not right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when I joined Green Christian when I was complaining to an older friend. I had very small children at the time, and saying, "Why don't people take this more seriously? Because I think the world's in trouble." And she said, "Oh," she went to a different church from me, and she said, "I think you might be interested in this," and gave me this magazine. And I joined up actually the same day. I sent my check off and joined up. It's a subscription model. It's just a couple of pounds a month, so it's very low cost, and all of that money goes into campaigns and literature, basically. So so it was a very slow, but I always had that deep love there, deep love.
Yeah.
And I was close to my mother's parents, who were themselves at heart country people, I think, because they lived where they lived they were on the edge of London when they got married in 1920 something, and then and at the end of their road, it's called Hazelwood Lane. At the end of their road were cornfields and farmhouses. But by the time I came along, London had spread far beyond there. The green belt had been built on, and then it's gone even further now. So probably another 10 miles of housing. So I was surrounded by people who really understood, and in a village, of course, who understood the seasons, understood the countryside, understood why animals do what they do, when they do it. So it was it was a privilege to have that right at the beginning, right in my heart. Yeah. And it's always been there, always been there. Yeah. Which is why I'm very at ease in remote places. Yeah.
So the title of the book is Aerth, spelled Aerth, and I also noticed the protagonist goes to Earth with URTH. So can you tell us about the wordplay and also the title of the book, and maybe what it's about?
Yes. Well, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but so the book was originally called First Do No Harm, because that was its working title. And in the book there are various chapters. I'll just find my copy. Actually, I have one copy. There we go. I've given the others away. I had 10 author copies. I have one copy, my working copy. There are four chapters. So first, the idea was the first planet, Earth, Aerth, which looks like a spelling mistake but isn't. They live by 5 precepts, and one is the first one, the most important one, is first do no harm, just like the doctors say. Then it's listen with all your heart, walk gently, live truth and love. And so my protagonist, Magnus, grows up on this planet, which has this very gentle way of dealing with life, you think first of all, before anything else, you don't do any harm, and that means you have to really think things through very carefully. We had an event at Foyles in September, and Ali Smith asked me. Ali Smith was the judge of the competition, and we had this event with Ali Smith and Kate Krimick, who came all the way from Australia, from Tasmania, who's the other winner of the prize. And Ali said to me, "Why? It's such a great title. This whole idea of a society where you first of all think, let's avoid all harm." And I said, "Well, unfortunately, because it's such a famous medical phrase, people would think it was all about doctors and hospitals, and we had to change the title. I always knew we would have to." So there's the first planet, Earth, and then the other planet. I played around for ages with another kind of, what do you call another Earth-like planet? Terra is a bit hackneyed, and that's what you hear it so often. And I thought, no, it's got to be. And then suddenly I realised maybe this is my dictionary writing, playing with words. I suddenly realised there's another way of spelling it. And what's so nice about the first spelling, Aerth, is it looks a bit Anglo-Saxon and a bit kind of, rural. And the other one looks rather, because it's URT, it looks urban and hard and tough. So the spelling is actually really important.
Yeah, I thought it was. That's why it must be intentional.
Yes.
And I think it's beautiful that you're right. The AE, it's very like Old English.
Yeah, it is. It is. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Earth seems quite masculine. The URTH.
Yeah. And it is. It is.
Yeah.
So without spoilers. So you haven't read the book yet yourself? Janine?
For an academic, I am terrible at reading. I don't like reading. So I didn't read the book. That's why I told Nate I'd rather have an interview with you, because if I need to do a review of the book, it's going to take 7 years.
Okay, all right. Okay,
yeah.
So there are 2 planets, and the idea, well, actually there are 3 in this planet. There is also Mars, but Mars only has a bit part. The 2 planets are very different, and they circle the sun so that they cannot see each other. And that comes from a really old idea that I don't know, it might be Greek even. I've heard it mentioned a few times. And I thought it would be quite interesting to play with this. But the first Earth is going into an ice age, and it has all sorts of difficulties because of that. They're a very generous society. They're very kind. They've done away with money. They are matriarchal. But they have 2 big problems. One is they're going into an ice age, and that was my starting point for the whole story, because in geological time, our planet that we live on now should actually be going into an ice age. We have reached the end of the interglacial period pretty well, and we should be going towards an ice age, which might take another, few thousand years, but really it should be happening. But we're not, because of what we've done to our planet. It's exactly the reverse. And this global warming that we're experiencing already is happening much, much faster than natural planetary warming ever did. There are all sorts of graphs and things out there, if you want to look them up, that show that the hockey stick graph, which goes straight up, is actually accurate. And in the past, when the planet moved from an interglacial period, which is what we're in now, when it heated up from an interglacial period, I'm getting my terms all wrong. When it heated up from a glacial period, it was like this, a slower, much more gradual ascent in terms of temperature. So I started thinking about what would it be like to be moving into an ice age as a society? How would that work? And it also has this other, so that there's all sorts of issues there. Then it has this other big problem, which is that there's a terrible disease that races around the earth from time to time and kills people off. And I wrote this well before the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and but I knew already that scientists and medics have been talking about the possibility of global pandemics for decades because we are vulnerable, and especially with zoonotic diseases that come from animals. With our increasing urbanization and and being much closer together, and of course increasing population. So I knew that was so that's what they're dealing with. And then Magnus, who's my young protagonist, he begins his life on this very cold planet, but he feels it's really tough, and he doesn't like it very much, and he hears about going to other planets, and he'd love to join Neil Strong, as in Neil Armstrong, but I didn't like to use the name, Neil Strong on Mars, and he does, and then he gets selected to go to the other Earth. And initially it's very exciting. Very sadly, his teammates die in the landing, but he's fated, and everybody wants to talk to him. He's terribly famous and all that, but slowly it becomes revealed to him that Earth, URTH, is a very different planet from his own. It's got massive global heating and all sorts of problems politically, and militarily, and all sorts of pollution and all sorts of things going on.
It's closer to our Earth.
It's closer to what's going on here. Yeah, it's closer to what's going on here, but more so.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and he has to work out. Oh, also, he gets trapped. He gets trapped because they go back on their promise to send him back to his own planet. So he then has to try and navigate this place with his own set of internalized values, which are very different from theirs, which are very individualistic. And so the first Earth is very much looking at the community, supporting each other and all that. And anyway, so it's an interesting, well, all fiction, I think, is an interesting what if, isn't it? So I did a big what if with this.
Yeah. And but I love the dichotomies. It seems like the one is feminine, collective culture, the way kind of things should be. Mm-hmm. And then Earth with a U is kind of, where we are at, exploiting the Earth, kind of masculine, global warming. Was that obviously that's intentional?
Yes. Yeah, it was. I think I spent a lot. I mean, I wrote it over so many years, really. But the first draft was about half the length it is now. Yes, I mean, I thought, I can't even remember why I thought of putting a second Earth in now. It was just a very interesting idea. I read somewhere a long time ago that Anglo-Saxon society treated women as equals.
Yeah.
And they were allowed to own property.
Yeah.
And it was not the same when the Normans arrived. The French way of doing things was very different. In fact, Normans were in fact Vikings. They'd come from the Norse. So that was also an interesting idea that women could have an equal. If we're going back to a kind of more rural, more smaller society, with women having much more say in how things are done.
Yeah.
And being in leadership, actually, which is what I ended up doing.
Yeah.
So it was a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I love that idea. That's my hypothesis. If the world was run by women, things would be different, in my opinion.
They'd certainly be different. Whether they'd be better or not, we don't know. But
yeah, we don't know. So I'm interested in science fiction. What opportunities do you feel the genre gave you to explore these issues? I love sci-fi because it allows us to imagine a hypothetical future or situation. So it's acceptable for people to read it or to watch it. But it's still hypothetical. So
Yes.
it's not like real, like this is threatening the order of things.
Yes.
So I think a lot can be explored with sci-fi. So yeah, how did you feel sci-fi kind of gave you that opportunity?
Well, yes, it was my first foray into sci-fi, actually. So, and it's not even very sci-fi. It's quite. I wouldn't call myself a science fiction writer particularly. I for a long time I decided I wanted to write realist fiction about climate and environment, and so my first two books were exactly that. They were, except the first one was quite speculative because it was set in the 21st century. Because I felt that there was a danger with sci-fi, that there's a little switch in our heads that says, oh, I don't need to take this seriously because it is not real in some way. But then on the other hand, there are some amazing books which have been taken very seriously, which are science fiction. So it's swings and roundabouts, isn't it? So it does allow you. It allows you to explore things that couldn't be explored otherwise. It would be very downbeat to write about a planet called Earth, URTH, and not have any kind of something different going on. There's a little bit of strange physics in this story as well that any scientist will say, well, no, that can't possibly happen, probably. But I just made it up. So that was quite fun. Making up physics, it was quite fun. So there's a kind of mirrorverse thing going on. He meets his double and the ground shakes and trembles, and we don't know what that is. The local people think it's fracking. It's to do with fracking. But he thinks it's to do with two universes colliding, and there's a danger of the whole universe imploding. So I played with those ideas. That was quite fun. But you can do a lot. You can do a lot in a kind of fantasy or a speculative fiction that you can't do in realist fiction. And so I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed it, and I didn't think I would quite so much, and I did very much.
Yeah, my research too, I was never into sci-fi, but it just naturally went that way for some reason. It feels like all roads lead to sci-fi.
Yes.
What I've experienced.
Yes, and there's some amazing books, and even James Cameron's films, Avatar.
Yeah.
We can because it's a unit. You go into the story knowing that it's a big fiction.
Yes.
And you might not ever get avatars the way he envisaged them in the films, but the whole point about destroying a planet it's loud and clear, but we accept it because it's science fiction.
Exactly. Yeah, he makes a lot of comments about the environment in Avatar, but then people love it.
Yes,
yeah, we're not offended by it because it's sci-fi and James Cameron directed it. So
yes. And the difficulty with realist fiction is you have to be very careful not to be preaching, not to have your authorial voice come into the characters and start preaching about what people should be doing. And that's a tricky balance. So, and having written both, this was I probably had less anxiety about this book than I did with the others.
Yes.
So in that sense.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. When I spoke to Erin too, she was also, I think this is a general fear for writers to sound preachy. Yes. If you write about some important issue. Her book was about it's socially conscious horror, she calls it. It's talking about, political issues, but using horror as a vehicle. And I think sci-fi too, it allows us to say controversial things or things that are not nice to hear, but because it's using sci-fi as a vehicle, we easily accept it.
Yes.
So final two questions. What would you like us to gain from this book once people have read it? What would you like us to feel or to realize from reading it?
Yeah, that is a very difficult question. I'd like people. What do I like? I always want people to learn to respect nature. So even things like those ski things, jet skis in off the coast, I see people using those, and that I find quite upsetting because it's actually causing quite a lot of damage. To the vibrations going through the water damages the ecosystem, and it causes shock in fish and dolphins and so on. I mean, they probably keep well away now when they know it's an area that is going to have that kind of activity. But it's respect rather than treating the world as an object that we can exploit. I would really love people to start thinking more carefully about, because of the two contrasts of the two earths, where it logically ends you, where it takes you. The other thing about respect for each other, really, and if you ever do get round to reading it, there's the whole thing about the 5 precepts or mottos that people live by in the first earth is about respect and about love and about support and kindness and compassion. And really, we don't have enough of that. If you look at the political situation around the world, it's horrendous at the moment. And people do take, without realizing it, they absorb what's going on in the news, and it somehow comes out in everyday discourse or everyday activities. So that's very much part of who I am, about how we treat each other.
I must say, after doing this interview, I really want to read the book.
I hope you do.
Because I feel like the way you've explained it, I feel like I can gain something from it. Because it seems very, very conscious and very sensitive. And like you say, if we all live by that idea of, first of all, do no harm, actually the world would be a completely different place.
It would be. And that's what Ali Smith said. She just loved it. And she was really fed up that the title had to be changed.
I like the title Aerth. I think it's very cool.
Thank you. And we can send you a PDF if that's easier, or I can ask Neil if he would send you a book all the way to South Africa.
That would be difficult because our postal system is a mess. But
is it?
It will probably not reach me. But a PDF, I'd be very grateful.
We can do that straight away. And it's not a long book. It's very short. It's only 32,000 words.
It's even better.
32,000 is nothing.
Okay, I can.
It's also written in tiny chapters because my husband is dyslexic, and he just found that really, really helpful. And I said, I'm really, really sorry, but the next book isn't written in tiny chapters, but it's just chapters because it's the flash fiction format. It's a novella in flash, so lots of small chapters. I think the smallest is 1 sentence. So
so that makes it much easier to read too.
And it's playing around with lots of techniques as well.
Now I think I'm going to give it a read.
Great.
Definitely.
I'm really pleased to hear that. Thank you.
And then final question, what are your future projects? Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here? I know, I was wondering that last night because I thought you might ask me that. I actually don't know. I have a couple of ideas in my mind which I don't want to mention because it might jinx it for me. Do you know that feeling? When I've talked about stories in the past to people, I've then thought, it's almost as if my brain says, well, you've done that now. It's quite odd. So I've got a couple of ideas. One is, the Wilder Path, which also had to have a title change for another reason. The Wilder Path has the main protagonist, or the protagonist, is a woman in her late 60s called Rosalie. And I thought I might take some of the characters from that book and do a standalone with the same people. And it wouldn't have to be read as a sequel. Wouldn't have to be. I want to make it a standalone so that people would read it separately. With a very, very different storyline. And I think she would be a minor character in that, and somebody else would be a more important character. And then I also have an idea. I've been thinking a lot about, for some reason, world government at the moment, which is is a pretty horrible concept in my view, because it all depends on who's running it. So I don't know whether that would ever get off the ground, whether I'd do anything. I might like to write some short stories as well. I haven't written very many. I've done a lot of very, very short stories in the flash fiction thing, around about 300 or 400 words. And I've done long, but I haven't done many kind of 3,000-4,000 stories. And I'd quite like to have a go at some.
Yeah, I love the short story format. Maybe because I don't like reading, but
is it that you read so much you get tired, do you think?
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's not that I don't like it, I'm just tired.
Yeah, I understand that. Do you know, I had a similar, when I was working on dictionaries and we were analysing language to the nth degree every day, all day, every day for 8 hours a day. I actually stopped reading. I couldn't read because I found that as I was reading, I was analysing the language in the book or wherever. And I actually stopped reading for about 6 years. So
same.
During
the pandemic, I started to read again a bit, kind of as a means of escape. But yeah, generally, I think I'm going to read Aerth. I think that will be my next read.
And they are very short chapters, so hopefully you enjoy it. We'll get that sent to you today. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's all the questions. Was there anything else you wanted to share on this platform?
No, not really. I was just interested in the Sci-Fi feminist blog. It's interesting that you're coming at it from a feminist point of view, which is very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's why I kind of picked up well, I think when I read your novel, I'm probably going to approach it as a sort of a eco-feminist novel, you know, that's talking about how humanity as the masculine force kind of exploits nature, the more feminine force. I can envision a type, if I just hear you talk about it, that's probably how I'm going to be analyzing it.
That would be interesting. I'd love to know what you think, actually, because I haven't laid it on thick about that. But I can tell you one thing. My mother she was brought up in a very traditional family. She was born in 1935, I think. But she had 4 daughters, and she was determined that we would all go to university and not end up just being a housewife and mother as she had to be. So that was quite interesting. And I was in that time in the 70s as a formative time for me as a teenager, hearing things about, you know, women burning their bras and Germaine Greer and all those people. And what was I'll just give you a little anecdote because it's quite interesting and weird, really. I went to a girls' school and it was very academic, and the teachers, who were mostly women, there were 2 or 3 men, mostly women, were very keen that we should fulfill our potential and go and do whatever we wanted to do. And they were always saying, you can do anything, you know, you can do. They didn't say it's tough out there, but that was we all knew it was tough out there. And then I thought, I don't know what I want to do. When I was in this sort of 6th form, which is like age 17. And I went to the careers teacher who happened to teach geography. And I went and talked to her, and there's this little cubbyhole office where they had all these kind of booklets about what you could do with your life. And I said, I really don't know what I'm going to do. What A-levels are you doing? I did French, Latin, and English. And I did an extra language as well. And you don't have the A-level system in South Africa, do you? No, because some Commonwealth countries do. Anyway, so that's sort of school leaving exams, and you do it to quite a depth at that level, just doing 3 or 4 A-levels. And so she said, "What are you doing?" I told her, and then she said, she just sort of looked a bit vague at me and said, "Well," I'm baffled. I said, "Well, you could be a secretary, or you could go into nursing." I thought, well, that was no help. No help at all. So yeah, I know. Yeah. So she couldn't think how I could break out of that. You know, how any of us could break out of that. Presumably she's giving all the same advice to all the other girls. Anyway, I did break out of it. I became a dictionary writer, and and did lots of other things that aren't relevant for now, but broke the mold really.
No, that's amazing. And I think it's thanks to those women from the 70s, the second wave feminists, that
Yes.
like people like me, no one ever told me, oh, you could be a secretary or a nurse,
No, exactly.
It was always like, pursue what you want to pursue. And even in academia, I found, I guess in the creative industry more, but at Open Window, where I'm currently at, our academic head is a woman, our department head is a woman, I'm the subject head, I'm a woman. It's just, it's accepted, and I'm not saying we don't need to fight for anything anymore, but I really think we've come a very long way, and I think largely it's in part it's thanks to especially that generation of feminists.
I would agree. I would agree absolutely. The second wave were really, really foundational to all of this. Well, the first wave really was foundational, but they did a lot. And I notice it when I'm just out walking, going to the shops or whatever. I see dads with pushchairs. I never saw that 30 years ago. Never. It's good.
Things have changed for the positive, but I do think, and I think that's why I came into this interview thinking, Janine, this is not an interview about feminism. So not everything's about feminism, but I can see how it subtly comes through, and I think that's really nice, because no one wants feminism pushed in their faces, but I do think doing it very subtly, like I presume you are doing in Aerth. I think that is kind of the way to do it now. Because these days, we don't need to burn bras, but in subtle ways, there's definitely still more to do, which is important.
Yes, it is. And it is subtle. You'll be reassured by that. Nowhere does it say Aerth is run by women. It doesn't say that, but it comes through. So, and I'm pleased that various people have picked that up already. So I'm really pleased about it.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
It's been a delight to talk to you, Janine. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for your time.